Life in medieval Europe was harsh, unpredictable, and often short. There were no safety laws, no workers' rights, and certainly no health insurance. For many people, simply going to work every day meant risking their lives. Some jobs exposed workers to deadly diseases. Others involved extreme physical danger. And a few were so brutal that most people refused to do them at any cost. Yet these jobs were essential for society to function. Without them, cities could not survive, armies could not fight, and kingdoms could not rule. Today, we explore some of the most dangerous and terrifying jobs in medieval Europe. And some of them were far worse than you might imagine. The gong farmer. One of the most disgusting and dangerous jobs in medieval cities was the work of the gong farmer. Despite the strange name, gong farmers had a very specific task. They cleaned out human waste from privies and cesspits. In medieval cities, there were no modern sewage systems. Instead, homes used pits where waste accumulated over time. When these pits filled up, someone had to remove everything. That someone was the gong farmer. They usually worked at night to avoid the smell spreading through the streets, and to avoid being seen by others. The job was incredibly dangerous. Cesspits released toxic gases such as methane and hydrogen sulfide. Workers could lose consciousness within seconds and suffocate. There are historical records of workers entering pits and never coming back out. Even worse, the waste carried deadly diseases like dysentery and cholera. Despite the risks, the job paid surprisingly well. Most people refused to do it, so cities had to offer higher wages. Still, it was a filthy and deadly occupation. The executioner. Another feared profession was the executioner. Executioners were responsible for carrying out punishments ordered by the authorities. This included beheadings, hangings, and other brutal forms of execution. At first glance, the job might seem powerful. But in reality, executioners were often treated like outcasts. Most people in medieval society believed executioners were morally tainted because they killed others for a living. As a result, they were often forced to live outside the city walls. Many townspeople refused to touch them, speak to them, or even trade with them. But the job was also extremely dangerous. If an execution went wrong, an angry crowd might attack the executioner. And performing executions required precision. A poorly delivered strike during a beheading could cause horrific suffering and provoke public outrage. Executioners also had to perform other disturbing tasks. They sometimes tortured prisoners, disposed of bodies, and cleaned execution sites. It was a lonely and disturbing life. The tanner. Tanning leather was essential in medieval society. Leather was used for shoes, belts, armor pieces, and countless other items. But the process of making leather was extremely unpleasant and dangerous. Tanners worked with animal skins that were often rotting. The skins had to be soaked in mixtures that included urine, lime, and even animal dung. Workers spent long hours handling these substances with their bare hands. The smell was so unbearable that tanneries were usually located far outside city centers. But the real danger came from disease and chemicals. Constant exposure to rotting flesh and bacteria caused infections and illness. Workers also inhaled harmful fumes every day. Many tanners suffered from chronic respiratory problems and skin diseases. Yet the demand for leather was constant, so the work never stopped. The knight. When we think of medieval knights, we often imagine noble warriors in shining armor. But the reality was far more brutal. Being a knight meant living with the constant possibility of violent death. Knights trained from childhood for warfare. When they entered battle, they faced arrows, swords, spears, and crushing weapons designed to break armor. Even if a knight survived battle, injuries were common. Broken bones, deep wounds, and infections could easily become fatal. Medical knowledge during the medieval period was extremely limited. A simple wound could lead to deadly infections. Knights also participated in tournaments. These events were meant to simulate combat and train warriors. But tournaments were incredibly dangerous. Many knights were seriously injured or killed during these competitions. So while knights were respected and admired, their profession was extremely risky. The miner. Mining was another deadly profession in medieval Europe. Miners dug deep into the earth searching for metals such as iron, silver, and gold. But medieval mines were incredibly unstable. Tunnels could collapse at any moment, trapping workers underground. There were also no proper ventilation systems. Miners often breathed toxic dust and fumes for hours every day. This led to lung diseases that slowly destroyed their health. Flooding was another constant threat. Water could suddenly rush into tunnels, drowning workers before they had time to escape. Explosions from trapped gases were also a serious danger. Despite these risks, mining was vital for producing weapons, tools, and coins. Without miners, medieval economies could not function. The plague doctor. During outbreaks of the Black Death, one of the most dangerous jobs was that of a plague doctor. These doctors treated victims of one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. The plague killed millions of people across Europe. Plague doctors wore long robes and strange masks with beak-like shapes. Inside the masks, they placed herbs and perfumes because they believed disease spread through bad air. In reality, the protection was minimal. Doctors were constantly surrounded by infected patients. Many of them eventually caught the disease themselves. Despite the danger, some doctors continued treating the sick in overcrowded cities. It was one of the most frightening roles during the medieval period. Conclusion. Life in medieval Europe was far from easy. For many people, survival depended on doing jobs that were dirty, dangerous, and sometimes deadly. Gone farmers risked suffocation in toxic pits. Executioners lived as social outcasts. Tanners worked with rotting animal hides and harmful chemicals. Knights faced violent deaths in battle. Miners dug through unstable tunnels deep underground. And plague doctors stood on the front lines during devastating pandemics. These workers rarely became famous. But their labor kept medieval society functioning. The next time you imagine life in the Middle Ages, remember that behind the castles and knights were ordinary people doing extraordinary and often terrifying jobs just to survive.